in contrast to Mark's work, I've been looking at the other end of the spectrum with ageing. It's sort of occupied me for the last 10 years or so. I started the journey with my mother, probably in the 60s show at the Auckland Art Gallery. I was looking at there was a lot of photography, and it sort of inspired me to see what she was looking like in her sort of 20s and 30s, and then sort of looking at where life changes with ageism. So anyhow, so this is where my interest in ageism in contemporary life, where my research began, and this was looking at how our identity is culturally constructed in life, and we put these identities onto people. So I was sort of really just looking at this, and I was wanting to put images out there that that made people sort of question themselves in relation to the subject of ageing, because it's sort of in contemporary life imagery is pervasive, but it's always of younger people. And so it was looking in this situation here of power and how we see people's identity coming out of that. I also sort of put in objects that sort of spoke of absence. My mother's a widow, she's 77, and it was sort of, this was relating to the chair that my father sat in, and a fur from her mother. So just sort of really exploring, and it was very much a collaborative process working with her. It became a lot more sort of performative. And it was those moments that were when she was getting up or doing things that became her, and that was quite interesting, because it sort of felt to me like there was a bit of her constructing her own identity of what she wanted us to see. So, and then this slide is the last one of this series, and it's I did a collaborative with Stephanie Johnson, and she wrote some poetry in response to some of these works, and that was with the Bruce Woolen Mills, and that's a sort of a bit of work that I need to carry on to do further. All these were presented in light boxes, which sort of was using the advertising media, which we see a lot of youth, and just subverting it by the subject matter. This was this was larger than life. It was 4 metres by 2.4 metres, and this is just a picture of the installation. It was 10 light boxes, and they were sort of, this was at Elam in my honours year, and they were placed throughout the university, so that when you turned a corner, they were there confronting you sort of at every corner to sort of annoy the person. This is a different body of work. I decided that it would be interesting to work with strangers, and in a studio setting where it sort of creates an emptiness and 0 point. I was working with people that I knew one person, and these were all her friends from the bowling club. And what was really nice, these photos are all from a series of when I met them for the first time and took their photos. And they were quite tense. So when they came back to be photographed again, it was quite different. And I think from the perspective of a photographer looking at your work, it was interesting, because you look at things differently when you don't know the person. It's a lot more loaded when you know a lot about a person and you read more into it. So it was standing back. I used the blue, sort of looking at it in terms of the blue-green screens of dropping people in and out of sort of so that they became almost characters. And it was interesting that they just had 2 things that I asked them to do, was to look down the barrel of the lens, and everything else was really up to them, what they wore or what they did with their hands. And I think it was what they did with their hands that I found the most interesting, because it sort of showed a self-consciousness. And I think when you look at portraiture, you often look for the flaws in a person. So that was that series, and then I went to the final series, which was where I looked at the critique of representation in photography, and exploring again the aesthetics in ageing in contemporary life, but of I'd sort of moulded it to being the unchosen, the de-idealised subjects in popular art, and it's mainly women. I have done men, but I probably prefer to work with the subject matter of the woman, and these ladies are widows, and they really enjoyed it. The images were life-size of the people, and they were on sort of glossy black paper, so that they sort of were talking once again to advertising, but subverting the subject matter. I did the objects just to kind of make a more poetic flow, to sort of to look at things in another way, that in terms of how shrouds have no pockets, empty bags. I wanted the images to be like falling through space, that they weren't fixed, and just that the black background works well to push forward the subject matter. It was just unusual objects that related to elderly too. But the unchosen sort of came from what Jean-Paul Sartre calls the eyes of the less favoured, and I think that's probably my interest, will probably keep me going for years, in those things that we overlook in life, and that these people tend to have a special relationship with disillusionment and disenchantment, and that sort of is what interests me. Yeah, I think that's the last one. It was Betty. Okay.